welcome to another episode of Well-Adjusted Mama. This is a podcast dedicated to educating and empowering women from preconception, pregnancy, birth, and through early motherhood on wellness lifestyle. I'm your host, Dr. Laura Brayton. I'm a chiropractor specializing in maternity and pediatrics, and I'm also a mother who has hand-selected experts in natural holistic healthcare specialties to shine light on options and choices during this exciting phase of a woman's life. Today, we switch gears a little bit, and I bring in my second attorney ever on Well-Adjusted Mama to talk about the baby effect from lovers to litigants with my special guest, Alan Feigenbaum. Alan is an experienced matrimonial and family law attorney whose prime focus is the maximization of his clients' long-term post-divorce emotional capital. He assists a diverse range of professionals and their spouses, including business owners, lawyers, investors, and entertainers, on their family law matters, with a notable focus on evaluating the optimal strategies to manage and resolve complex financial and custody disputes. He is well-versed in managing agreements, including separation, prenuptial, and postnuptial, to create a framework for his clients' futures, and approaches dispute conflict with an eye toward facilitating cooperation and reducing conflict, making every effort to settle cases out of court. Alan also has significant courtroom experience, including first-chair trial experience in domestic relation matters and an early stage in his career, examining witnesses before the U.S. International Trade Commission. He also speaks and writes frequently on matters of family law. Alan is a regular contributing columnist for the New York Law Journal on matters of divorce law, and for his pro bono work at the firm, Alan is a volunteer discharge upgrade attorney for the Veterans Consortium. Alan and his wife, Talia, live in Maplewood, New Jersey, with their 2 children. Hi, Al. Welcome to the show. I'm very excited to have you on today.
Thank you, Laura.
We're going to have an interesting conversation. You're my second attorney on the Well-Adjusted Mama show. And, a lot of times people think, why would an attorney be appropriate when it comes to perinatal holistic health? But there's a lot of relevance here. And so today, you and I are going to really focus on relationships and communications, specifically when partners, married or not, decide to have children and create a family, and how that can stress the family dynamics and the intimate relationship as well. So talk a little bit about your background, what you do, what your knowledge is on this topic.
Sure. I'm a husband, a father of 2, a boy and a girl, ages 16 and 13. I've been a divorce lawyer since 2008, which feels like a long time ago. Out of law school, I did 5 years at a corporate litigation firm, and I was well trained, but I found that to be terribly boring and desperately wanted to work with people. And I felt that the best way to move that forward was to enter the realm of divorce law. And I also do volunteer legal work for our vets in what is called discharge upgrade cases. And I probably would just note at the start that what I'll offer here comes from a male-female perspective, which is the only perspective I know. I just want to make it clear that there are a lot of other different types of relationships. I'm only offering one vantage point based on my lived experience, which of course is not everyone's experience. And so I don't want to generalize or preach. And I know that people have very strong opinions about what the quote unquote right or wrong way is to parent. And there may be a number of things that we talk about today that touch upon the importance, in my view, of a male partner being present for a pregnant female partner during pregnancy, and how you define present has many facets, but one of which is attending OB-GYN appointments. And I just want to be sensitive to the fact that that doesn't work for every couple, in the sense that you might be a military spouse and your husband is overseas and simply can't go to the appointments. That doesn't mean he's not present. So with that said, and all those caveats, I'll try my best not to rub people the wrong way.
Right. So it's interesting, as a divorce attorney, you're really seeing couples coming to you that have decided, I think you had used this word earlier, the relationship had hit the end of its shelf life, right? It was expired, and for multiple different reasons. And now it's like, what's next? Like, how do we divide our belongings and our co-parenting and our custody now that we're parents, and how do we co-parent together, and why that's really important to have healthy communication, even if you're choosing to end a marriage for the health of your children.
So you mentioned the word health a couple of times, and I think that's important because there was this study that was done in 2021 by this university in Switzerland, University of Bern. I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation, but they studied relationship satisfaction over time, including as between parents and non-parents. And they cited to research that suggested that two of the consequences of romantic relationships are subjective well-being and health, like you said. And I think whether you are in what divorce lawyers sometimes call an intact relationship, whatever that means, or if you're in the divorce phase, this really is the conversation that we're having about health and the mind-body connection. And I think where we kind of see the intersection between, I'll just get right to it, babies and divorce, is what I've read psychologists refer to it as protective relationship factors. And you mentioned some of them: intimacy, communication, time together. And those three things are all related. I would say, though, that before you even get to the phase of entering the office of a divorce lawyer, I think it's important to know that we're set up culturally for this image of what it's going to be like to have children. And I think there's no better way to encapsulate that than this movie that came out in 2019 called Yesterday. It was a Danny Boyle film. And in it, there was some weather event or supernatural event, and the protagonist was the only person on earth who could remember the music of the Beatles. And in the movie, he has a romantic interest, and we have to suffer through that boring relationship through the whole movie until finally at the end, they have what can only be described as the most awkward lovemaking scene I've ever seen in a movie. But then instantly you are shown images of this couple with children that is very quickly growing up. And in every scene, these kids and the parents are so happy. They're pathologically happy, just a constant state of euphoria. And if you've had children like you have, I have, that's just not reality. There's good times, bad times. It's challenging, it's rewarding. And I bring this up just because I think that people look at that image and think, well, if that's not happening to me, then maybe I feel ashamed. And that's where that can lead to conflict.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, God, I've never seen that movie, but
But the media would.
yeah, I was like, I don't think I want to see it. But at
No.
the end of the day, anything that's like, yeah, let's talk about what's real and what like a real family would looks like in our culture. And I think people feel a lot of shame if they don't feel like they fit those criteria, right?
That's correct. And I think that you have to make a judgment call in your relationship as to whether or not you and your partner are on the same page, in the sense that maybe you don't need to communicate certain things, or maybe you do. And if you're in the category of, yes, you do need to communicate, I guess the conversation I would say you want to begin with is, are you going to, you mentioned shelf life, are you going to put your relationship on the shelf as you begin the process of having a child and after you have children? And one of the generalizations that I often hear in the podcast ecosystem is, when you're in a relationship, you're committed to your partner, but then when you have kids, it's all about the kids. And I do not agree with that. I think if you allow that to happen, then it will happen. And I certainly see plenty of couples where that did happen. And that conversation always brings back to mind for me this modern love column in the New York Times from 2005. It was called Truly, Madly, Guiltily. And this woman wrote about how she loves her children, she'd do anything for them, but she's not in love with them. She's in love with her husband. And I think if you're in a relationship where you're conflating the two or switching the two, garbling them up, that's where the ghost of divorce past might be knocking at the door. If you're going to, consciously or unconsciously just allow your relationship to basically just be put on the shelf for who knows how long.
It's so true. I mean, it just makes perfect sense that if, I don't know if that's typically the female parent that is, I don't know, feeling more in love with their children. I mean, maybe I'm generalizing and I shouldn't do that, but they're like, oh my God, I'll do anything for my children. And their husband feels neglected. And it creates challenges in the relationship, right? He's not getting the attention that he had in the past. And, people start to neglect each other as partners.
They do. And I think, look, again, that does not uniformly happen, but certainly after a child is born, there are a multitude of things in play where little cracks in the relationship foundation can continue to build if you're not careful. And it may seem silly, but certainly to me, having gone through it, two of the biggest areas are feedings and diaper changing. And it might, again, with feedings, right? So this one, with an infant in those first few months, if you're a couple that sleep trains a child in the Ferber method, which I did with my wife, and God bless it, it worked. But those first few months are just excruciating. And I think if you're in a relationship dynamic, which I see in the divorce world, where you have a female partner saying, I would like you, my male partner, to get up in the middle of the night and share the feedings with me. I can't do all of it. It's exhausting. And then you have a male partner who might say, yes, but I have to work. And to me, and again, I feel strongly on this one, and there's plenty of people who disagree with me. I can't understand that statement, because working for a wage, yes, that's work. But being with a baby who does nothing but sleep, cry, eat, and shit, and you're not getting any sleep, that's not just work, it's excruciating work. So the idea that, well, a man has to go to work, I just can't subscribe to that. And look, I've lived it, and my wife and I switched off every few hours, and it was brutal. But I didn't do that complaining. I wanted to do it. And I think it just enhanced the bond that I now have with my kids. But I bring this up because in New York, we have what's called equitable distribution of assets, which the courts always remind us does not mean equal. And therefore, courts look at what contributions did either of you, the spouses, make to the marriage. So you can get out your contribution scorecard, and you can get all the way down into the weeds of who got up in the middle of the night to feed the baby.
Wow.
And what I see in
that, so crazy that this is like presented in a court of law.
It is. And when we talk about what gets presented, one of the, to me, more unfortunate things, sometimes it can get nasty. And one of the descriptions that I have seen in some contentious litigation is that when a woman says, look, I contributed in the sense that I was the primary caregiver, sometimes I see the male counterpart saying in litigation papers, well, not really. You were just at home on the couch, quote unquote, eating your bonbons. And I just find that offensive, but that gives you a sense of what happens when these relationships break down. And just, again, to go even deeper when we talk about the feedings, a common, I don't know if you call it a stereotype or generalization that I also see is, well, if a woman is breastfeeding, then of course a man can't help out with feedings. But I don't understand that either, because you can put breast milk in a bottle, and a man can get off his ass in the middle of the night, go into the refrigerator, and get the bottle. So, but again, that's another thing that becomes an issue in dispute, which is one party saying, look, you can help out here. It doesn't matter that I'm breastfeeding. And the other party says, well, no, that's just for a woman.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of things here, right, to unpack.
There are.
I would say, from a holistic perspective, there's certainly some moms that want to exclusively breastfeed. They don't want to pump. They want to be the one to nurse their child. And so that mom needs extra support in other ways, right? So if the dad is going off to work, then she needs someone to maybe come by during the day to help with the house and the baby, so she can take naps, because her sleep is obviously going to be interrupted those first few months while, night feedings are happening. So there's a lot of ways to support these new parents, right? And it can look different for every family. So what I've seen in previous podcasts is the couple, once again, what works for our family? It doesn't matter what works for that family or that family. What do we need? And they can start having these conversations during the pregnancy. about the workload distribution, right? And getting really clear, and those expectations are set of what each role is. And I feel like that could help a lot of the challenges when both parents are sleep deprived, exhausted, and stressed during the fourth trimester.
It could certainly help. I think the issue is that I wouldn't make the assumption that couples talk to each other. I think actually the footage that I've seen suggests that many of them do not. And it seems counterintuitive because you would think that, well, this is my romantic partner. I mean, who else would I not confide in? But it turns out many times that does not happen. And so if you're, for example, in the other category I mentioned, if you're walking into a baby entering the scene and you've had no discussion about diaper changing, again, there are many couples where you don't have to have that conversation. It's completely understood that that's going to be a 50-50 deal. Everyone's going to pitch in. But in many couples, it isn't. And I've witnessed one of the most painful things to witness, if you ask me, is watching a man and a woman argue over who's going to change their screaming baby's diaper.
Yeah.
And I just, look, I'm reminded of when my daughter was born. My wife was sharing the room with somebody else, and the nurse came in and told this father, like, I'm not coming back here anymore. This is your kid. You have to change the diaper. I'm not doing it anymore. And she stormed out of the room. To me, just, I don't know why this is so complicated, but the issue is, and you talked about moms that, look, they want to have ownership if they're breastfeeding and whatnot. That to me gets into another area, which is, do you see your male counterpart as your partner or a babysitter?
As a partner, right.
And my big issue is that a parent can't be or shouldn't be a babysitter of their own child. But if you're approaching the dynamic as a child is born as, well, I can never leave the child with my male partner. Somehow in 2024, I still see this. And again, I agree with what you're saying that it's whatever works for every couple, right? The issue is with the work that I do and what I see and the conflict that I see, that can lead to conflict where you have a situation where a male partner is basically set up to be a non-functioning person. So there's, the female partner does not want to leave the child alone with the male partner. This also, becomes, are you setting your male partner up for a situation where he's never going to know how to wash a dish, fold an article of clothing, take out the trash? And are you, as the female partner, lining yourself up for a lifetime of washing your husband's underwear? And I wish I could say I was kidding, but I'm not.
Yeah, because you see it. And now let's take it to the next level, because you and I are both parents and we both have sons. So when we have parents that are interacting like this and following these very, very old school traditional roles, that's what's being modeled for the next generation, right? And I will say, I'm seeing young parents in my practice that are, the dads are much more involved than even 20 years ago when I started practicing, which is awesome. But at the end of the day, like, this is really important. How we behave and act is so much more imprinted on our children than what we say, right? So if the son is constantly seeing their mom do all of the housework, right, then they're like, oh, I'm just going to marry a woman who's going to do all the housework because that's what women do. And he might be in for, he might have difficulty dating when he's out there.
That's a polite way of putting it. I couldn't agree with you more. And I do think that that is very important for parents raising a son. I mean, it sounds simple, but it's like, no, you need to do your laundry. You need to clean up after yourself. And we should not be teaching our male children to do that when they're, 18 or 25. These are things that they should be learning starting, I don't know, age 9, 10. I mean, or before. But the output or the byproduct of this to me is incredible because your children are then in a position to actually become functioning adults. And I think that's critical for a male.
It is. And that's what we're talking about really, is how do we raise these healthy adults, adulting, right? Like, we don't even have to wait till high school to start teaching basic, like, cooking easy meals, healthy meal prep, throwing in their own load of laundry, this is keeping your room clean. Nobody likes a messy roommate when they cohabitate. So like, these are really important life skills that I think definitely start at a young age.
It's exactly what you just said. They are basic life skills. But again, even in 2024, there are a lot of marriages where the male counterpart, whether he knows how to do those things or not, does not do them. And I talked about cracks in the foundation and the kind of ire from the female perspective of, look, I've been dealing with this for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And yes, he's out there in the workforce, but he does absolutely nothing around the home. And I get it. The things that have to be done to maintain a home, sure, a lot of it is not exciting. I hate doing laundry. I hate getting groceries. Someone has to do it. And at least from my perspective, it's not fair to just pin it on one person.
Right. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I know we really are focusing on that female male dynamics in the divorce cases, and you've seen a lot of divorces in your career. It almost sounds like guys are the ones that are really breaking the marriage here. Is that fair to say? I mean, that might be
Wow.
too.
You're really getting into some material there, Laura. No,
Is it just a bunch of assholes out there? Like, what is going on?
no. Oh, this is getting good. No, I don't think that that is accurate. And look, people are always approaching me saying, what is the one reason why marriages end? And I don't think it's not a black and white exercise. But no, I don't think it's a situation where you can just pin it all on what we're talking about right now. As far as, I'm not even sure you could say it was the female or it was the male. There are often a variety of factors that play into it. I tend to think that more often than not, they can be tied back to cracks in communication or just non-communication altogether. Things are kept under the rug. And then the tension because of that continues to build. And then ultimately somebody goes off the rails and breaches trust. But no, I don't think that, look, because I have many cases with fathers that are completely involved and do all these things that I'm describing. I'm just stunned that I still see the opposite as well. I thought by now that would have changed, but it most certainly hasn't.
Right. And I think what we even see, like when I'm seeing Gen Z now going into their adult years, and this is across the board, it's certainly not gender specific. They've been coddled for their whole life. So they don't really know these basic life skills. So, I feel like that, like, and also like, cause I just finished The Anxious Generation. So it talks about this phone-based childhood. So
Right.
Gen Z was going through puberty, the oldest part of Gen Z in 2010 when the first iPhone was released. And nobody knew how detrimental that was to these developing brains that were 12, 13, 14 years old, and the impact of how they would be able to communicate in real life with peers, intimate partners, and what this is, created now. Like, these people are adults and they're out in the workforce, and I'll see them out to dinner and they're both on their phones instead of talking to the person across the table from themselves, right? It's like,
That's always
wow.
a sad existence when you see that, when you see a couple out to dinner, whatever, just on their phones. I always point that out to my children and say, like, see that is not what you want when you get older.
Right.
I don't know, in a sense, maybe I'd rather see a couple having an awkward moment at the dinner table and being silent than seeing them just sitting there on their phones.
Yes.
But to your point on the issue of modeling, I also think that, of course, that is critical in the sense of children seeing that, okay, both mom and dad are fully committed and involved here. It's not the family structure when I grow up is not going to be, mom does 90% and dad, I don't know where dad is. So I do think that that's very important. That gets a little outside the divorce realm, but I think, look, when you talk about communication, this is a topic that I love talking to my children about in the sense of I just say to them, don't be a boring person. Ask other people questions. Uh,
Mm,
and you're not going to be able to do that if you're just sitting there on your phone.
yeah. Like you're not going to even know how to ask somebody a question if you
No.
just don't have those social cues and
Many people do not know how to ask them. And many of
Mhm.
them are lawyers. Just kidding.
Oh.
Just,
Usually lawyers are really good at asking questions.
just ones that people don't want to hear.
Right, exactly. So let's talk a little about these cracks, the little cracks that are in the relationship foundation that maybe, you had your honeymoon and you're like that first year newlywed life is bliss. Now you're pregnant and you're like, oh God, we're going to need, some extra money and, our house is too small and blah, blah, blah. And these stresses are starting to compound during the pregnancy and now the birth of the baby in this relationship. What can a couple do to help keep their marriage strong and healthy? I mean, I know you're not a relationship expert, or maybe you are actually. You're not a therapist, but
No,
what
but
would you
I
what
feel,
advice?
look, whether I'm at the office or out of the office in my own relationship, it's kind of a relationship cycle 24/7. So to your point, look, I think that, again, in many couples, it's understood that both of them are committed to making sure that the relationship doesn't die when a child is born. But I think you are correct that in many relationships, it is easy to forget about the primary relationship, because there is so much to do when a child is born, especially in those early years. And look, I look back on the pictures from the first 10 years or so of my kids' lives, and we look exhausted. But we were there, we were present. It was a difficult time for our family because we lost a lot of people in our family. We were always there. But I also know that we also always prioritized us. And while that wasn't ideal in the sense of it's not like it is now where they're teenagers and frankly they don't want to hang out with their parents and we don't want to hang out with them either, but in that first decade, um, it's critical not to lose sight, if you ask me, and if you're looking to actually have a relationship that lasts, in not losing sight of where you started. And does that mean that maybe you have to expend some additional effort? Yes, it does. And does that mean that maybe you have to do some extra feedings in the middle of the night when you don't want to? Yes. And I think, again, I mentioned going to doctor's appointments at the beginning of this. One thing that I do see is mom has a doctor's appointment. It's important. And dad says, I'm sorry, I have work. Now, there are going to be times, of course, there's a work obligation. You can't go. But there are other times when just saying, yes, but I go to work that doesn't really pan out. And that's why I
Yeah.
say cracks. Um, in my
Because
own,
really, most of the time nowadays, these women are also working, right? Especially if this is their
correct,
first pregnancy.
that's exactly
So
right.
they're taking time out of their work schedule to go to this doctor's appointment.
That is right. I mean, I come from my wife and I both work. And I mean, it reminds me when she was pregnant with our son, a few weeks before her first pregnancy was miserable. But about a few weeks before birth, the doctor said I could not travel. At the time, I was in a career where there was travel. Um, and to me, that's an example. So even though I had travel lined up, you just cancel it. Not everybody was thrilled with that, but too bad. I wanted to be present. And that, I mean, you're bringing back old stuff here, but I have seen, when we talk about how work is viewed in our culture, I used to be in a world where people would say, I wasn't even there for my kid's birth. Why? I was working. I don't, I'm not really sure why that's a badge of honor. I think that your family does come above all else. And when it doesn't, don't be surprised if those cracks start to develop.
Right. Yeah. So what's more important, work or your family? And then when it comes to your family, understanding that putting your intimate partner first and foremost in the relationship is key. The whole family benefits, right? When you're your intimate relationship is a priority and you're putting a lot of energy and focus and love into it.
It does. And I often hear that, oh, children, what do they know? They're stupid. I actually think it's the opposite. I think they are very perceptive and they internalize things and they figure things out and they're observing their parents day in and day out. And so whether I look at my own experience or I look at the experiences that I see in my cases, I think it is, if you care, if you're looking to model appropriately for your children, just be aware that they're taking notice of what's going on in the home. And, perhaps one of your children doesn't care as much, but the other one does.
Right.
My daughter has said to me before, I don't know, maybe this was last summer. She was like, "Are you in an argument with mom?" And I said, "Look, we had a disagreement. This is going to happen. You'll be in a relationship someday. You're not going to agree with your partner on everything. It's okay. Mom and dad, we don't scream at each other, but you don't agree on everything all the time. You talk about it, you move on, done." But at that time, she was probably 11, and she's coming up to me saying, "What's wrong?"
Mm. And children do have a different perspective. When there is arguments, sometimes it's like, oh, this is forever, right? And don't recognize that there's these emotions, big emotions can come and go, right? They're not there present 24/7.
But it is, how you deal with them. And certainly in the work that I do, a lot of times that type of a conflict or just a disagreement is not handled well. It's handled in ways that involve raising your voice or name calling is a big one, put downs. I mean, look, these are all forms of abuse. They're not physical abuse, but it no doubt is emotional abuse. And that, of course, affects the person who's the target of that. And it's going to affect the kids that are observing it.
Right. And they do observe that all. And I even, I have a friend who went through a divorce and she's like, well, we never argued in front of our children, which is, I think, good, maybe. Like they didn't have what you're talking about, but also when they actually did split, the children are like, what the heck? We thought you guys were happily married when they were not. He had cheated on her and the marriage was over. So, I think like back to that perception, like, yeah, you don't have to yell and scream and name call, but the energy is still going to be picked up by your kids to a certain extent, right? If the marriage is not healthy. And we can't hide everything from our kids as much as we want to, right?
No, of course, you don't want to be fighting in front of your children and whatnot, but you don't know what's coming from one day to the next, particularly in a relationship. And might it be the case that you differ on something with your partner and your children happen to be there and they observe that? Yes, it happens. But I think there's a difference between a healthy disagreement, which is perfectly fine, versus a situation where something escalates and then it just becomes about, trying to attack someone else. I talked about putting people down. I mean, that's where, to me, the big concern is, are your children going to learn that that's the appropriate way to act in a relationship?
Right. Yeah, they will learn that that's normal, right? So if somebody is having a disagreement with their partner and let's say the children are in the room, what's the best way to manage that? Like we have to communication about that disagreement needs to happen. Do they excuse themselves from the room and ideally schedule it at a time when the kids aren't around and maybe they're also less heated?
If you have a good head on your shoulders, but you're concerned that there's going to be an intense argument with your spouse, then yes, I agree with what you're saying. I do think you excuse yourself from the room. I mean, just like sometimes little children need a timeout. They just need to step away for a moment.
Right.
The problem is that in what you're describing and in the types of cases I see, the parents or a parent does not have the good judgment to know to do that. And instead it just spills out in front of the children.
So so if that happens, what do you do?
You're asking, let's say, if a client of mine, if I know that has happened, oh, it's very clear. Do not do that. I mean, I'll raise my voice. Let's see, for that, I'll raise my voice.
You're parenting them.
No, look, they are the parents, right? I'm here to advise how things would be perceived in a court of law if you ever get to that point, right? I can't substitute and be the parent. But of
Right.
course, there's always a little bit of bleeding over because I have my own parenting experience, right? And I'm human. And so clients are going to ask. It may not be a purely legal question. They might be asking a question that involves parenting advice. And in that front, the answer is always the same. Do not put your children didn't ask for this. You know, you don't get a choice. Your parents are who they are. You're stuck with it. Hopefully it's good. It may not be. But they should not bear the brunt of your conflict. Easier said than done, but certainly that's the advice I give. I do not have any patience for that if parents are going to war in front of their children.
Right. So if a couple has decided their marriage is over and they have children, what are some of the best ways to help go through that process that is going to be the healthiest for the family and the children specifically?
Well, the first is, to the extent it's possible, to stay out of court.
Okay.
I mean, that's first and foremost, right? And I understand that there are some cases where it just can't be helped, but I do not subscribe to traditional lawyer think in that, well, when a case comes to you, you go straight to court. I don't think that that is accurate at all. But I think the real challenge is, I mean, look, children of all different ages, right? If we're talking about children in the infancy, toddler, really young children, right? I think where it gets very hard to work things out, and this is not uniform, but are situations where each parent is looking back on how things went and who cared for this child when they were a baby. And look, you've got one parent saying, hey, I did all this work. I don't know where you were. And the other parent saying, what are you talking about? I was there as well. And I think that, again, goes back to what you said about communication, and that it's important for parents to know who's doing what, and are you not just okay with that, but are you really satisfied with it? Or are you always walking around thinking he or she really just isn't pulling their weight? Because if that's going to be the mentality, and you're always thinking that I'm really, carrying everything here, my partner just isn't involved, really, what do you think is going to happen? The natural expectation is that relationship is going to break. But I think it is particularly hard with young children because they have their whole lives ahead of them. And also, they haven't lived here that long. So there's not much to look at in terms of parenting, unless you have a parent who has a substance abuse problem or there was violence. If it's a typical family, maybe both work, maybe one works, it's not so easy to figure out, well, what's the real issue here? It looks like they basically were raising this kid together, but maybe not. I don't know. I wasn't there. So to me, it gets particularly challenging to resolve these custody cases involving younger children. But that doesn't mean that it is impossible. But my view, look, matrimonial lawyers, I find, are often asked, well, what do you prefer, financial or custody cases, right? And I think just with custody, being a parent as long as I have, I will say that has my degree of patience shrunk over time? Yes, in the sense of I expect and want parents to not put their kids through this. Again, make this as easy as possible on your children. Unfortunately, many do not do that. Sometimes it's beyond their control because one partner acts obscenely, the other does not. But again, my strong advice is, number one, if you can stay out of court, stay out of court. But number two, do whatever you need to do, communicate however much possible to not bring your children into the fold. And when I say into the fold, I mean in a situation where lawyers are being appointed for children and forensic psychiatrists are being appointed to interview the whole family.
Oh, God. It can get that ugly.
Yes, and it can take years.
That just sounds so toxic for everybody involved.
I would agree with that. Like I said, it is sometimes unavoidable, right? But I approach this with the attitude of, let's see if it is avoidable.
Right. And so that's really the advice, is how can we just help these people have an amicable separation, right?
Which is not, look, I get it. People are coming to me The relationship is ended. Perhaps one person wants it to continue, the other does not. Maybe they both decide it's over. But they're already in an emotional state. But if you now are going to add the layer of, and now let's also rope our children into it, it certainly can be an emotional downward spiral.
What does it look like if parents are wanting shared custody and one parent for work, let's say, is looking to move out of the area, out of state, perhaps?
Right. So look, that parent can move wherever they want, but they're not taking the child with them, not without consent of the other parent or a court order. So you're getting into issues of relocation, and in New York, consideration of, is it in the best interest of a child to be relocated to a new state? The fact of the matter is, you already know this, but once you have a child, many, many things change. It is an incredibly big decision. I personally think that the decision to get married is also an enormous decision. And yet, despite that, it is so easy to get married. But somehow it is so difficult to get divorced. Even in the cases where it's amicable, like you say, we have a system now here in New York post-pandemic where just because of administrative difficulties and lack of resources, you could be waiting 12 to 18 or 24 months before you get a judgment of divorce. But really what I'm talking about there is that, for example, in New York, you're not getting a judgment of divorce until you've resolved all the economic issues, right? Now, obviously, you need to resolve custody also, but let's say you've resolved custody, you still have to resolve all the economics. And if you don't, you're not getting a judgment of divorce. So again, that's why I brought up why or how just kind of the odd dynamic there, in that it's a piece of cake to get married, just go down to City Hall. And then there are some states where you can self-solemnize, if you can believe that.
Wow.
But getting divorced is actually a tall order.
Interesting.
Somebody decided that they wanted us to stay married, so.
Yeah. Why can't you just go to City Hall and be like, hey, we don't want to be married anymore?
That's exactly right.
Oh, good. Well, we're wrapping up this interview, Al. It's been such an interesting conversation around relationship communication and co-parenting and sharing household responsibilities. Do you have any last thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
I think, look, first, thank you very much for having me. Second, this idea of a couple that says, look, we're in a miserable marriage, but we're going to stay together for the kids. I can't, look, every couple is different. You're going to make the calls that you want to make. I can sit here and say, well, why would you do that? But I'm not in that situation. Oftentimes I see that decision does not usually lead to good results because the marriage that's already deteriorated continues to deteriorate. But I do want to point out that I think that there's a lot written on children of divorce and the hardship, but from what I see, children of divorce are very resilient people. They go on to become great successes. So I don't, just because you're a child of divorce, I really don't think the assumption should be made, oh, you're in a different category. Quite the opposite. I think that they grow up to be fully functioning members of society. And I've seen they do good things. So I think I just offer that counterpoint to, well, we're both miserable, but we have to, see this out for the kids. Maybe not.
Right. And then the other thing is like maybe the culture of shame around like, oh, we don't want to be the only couple in our friend group that gets divorced. Right. So like also navigating that doesn't have to be shameful to get divorced.
No. And what's the alternative? You'd rather remain the miserable couple in your friend group.
Maybe the other friends are miserable too. Who knows?
That's correct. Don't invite me to that party. Right.
Oh my God. All right. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation today. And if people want to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
So I'm a divorce lawyer at Blank Rome. You can look me up and find that easily enough. Also, you can find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram at @alrichard_F as in Frank. Also at Nonlinear Love Stories, which is a project that I've started with a writer. It's kind of a bohemian marketplace for people to share stories of love, romance, and breakups, all with an eye towards eliminating some of the seriousness around these conversations about breakups and hopefully reducing conflict as a result.
Beautiful. Al, it was a pleasure.
Likewise.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode with Alan. He is a really entertaining person to talk to, full of a lot of great information. And ultimately, from all of his experience in working with divorcing couples, there's a lot of lessons that he's been able to learn and then share with us about really understanding how important it is to support and nourish your intimate relationship with your partner, especially after having a baby and as the children get older, and why that can really be preventive for ending up in divorce court in the first place. However, if the marriage is over, there's still a lot of healthier ways to help separate your relationship despite having co-parenting and children together. So I think it's important to know that there's attorneys out there that are really vested in the emotional capital regarding divorce, as well as the mental and emotional health of children of divorce as well. So if you want to find out more information about Alan, you can find him at his practice, the firm he works for, Blank Rome, blankrome.com. And you can also check out his nonlinear love stories at nonlinearlove.com.